Good morning. Today we are going to be talking about preventing and the management of COVID-19 at home by purifying the air your family breathes. Global atmospheric warming has caused this lethal pandemic. This virus is a pollutant in our atmosphere. You can remove it and provide your family with clean, purified, sterile air to breathe. Global atmospheric cooling starts in your home and our homes. It is not expensive and affordable by most families. Society will help those who can't afford it. Economic and social disruptions will ensure compliance by everybody concerned. We are able to block COVID-19 infection cycle, and this has several advantages. It has potential home prevention management areas for health and safety. It can stop the pandemic, it can prevent lockdowns, it can rescue our economies, and it can clean our environmental air. The expected effects on infective dose inhaled. In other words, if you're going to inhale infective doses, what sort of effects can you expect? Well, there are those which are going to make the infections less frequent, which is bats. Bats fly, and when they're flying, the air in front of them will only have a small amount of COVID, if any, and as if they have got it themselves, then if they exhale, the air which they're flying into gets wafted past them and they carry on flying. They give effective doses there for other bats maybe, but they themselves aren't going to catch it because they're flying fast and it has been wafted away from their face. There's no reinfection, re-inhaling of it. So bats flight is one thing. Bats also sleep upside down. This is a tremendous advantage as well, as you will see, because the bats are sleeping upside down, the nose is facing down towards the ground, gravity is pulling the virus out of their lungs, and gravity is also pulling down on whatever is in their abdomen. So it's pushing down on the diaphragm, and also because they're hanging by the legs, they will be stretching the tissues over the abdomen tight, right? So they've got no extra space there. So all that is forcing pressure on the lungs, and the diaphragm just needs to relax. The lungs get compressed down. Very little is left which can get out, and everything is excreted out by being upside down. Then even when they come to inspire, they inspire, but they've got massive flight muscles. So for their size, they've got these huge muscles attached to their chest cavity, which can easily inhale. There's not much effort for them, and they don't even move their wings. Their wings just remain closed around them, even keeping their infants warm underneath their wings. So they've got several advantages just because the fact that they are sleeping upside down exhaling and the virus is coming out. They have no need to do anything about it. Think about bats as they can't do anything about it. Think about viruses, they can't do anything about it. Neither of them are in control of our destiny, but we are. So there are things which we can do about it. There's lockdown, like keep us in our homes. Home is usually the most cleanly place which we live in because we make sure that it is. So lockdown puts us back off the responsibility away from society, back onto us at home. And at home is quite often we are elderly or as well. So we've got to be very careful that we look after them in a lockdown as well. And also we have a dead space, expiration of endogenous water. Now, if you drink some water, that water, if it's going to be turned into water vapor to expire, then for any substance, the gram molecular weight of the solid liquid produces 22.4 litres of gas. Now that's quite a lot. Gram molecular weight of water is 18. So 18 grams, a cc weighs roughly a gram. It's 18 grams, that's about 4 teaspoonsful. Whereas they compared that with 22.4 litres, that's a lot of expansion which has taken place. Now obviously we don't turn all the water we drink into vapor. Some of it will get passed out as urine, some of it will get transpired, but the fact is that if you're dehydrating or living in a dry environment, as many people do, semi-deserts or deserts, people live there in a dry environment and our body adapts to that. That just, as long as we get the water to drink, then we can expire large quantities of it. Large quantities of it, if we're expiring it, we're going to be taking the virus out of our body. And it's not just the water, it's also everything else which is volatile. Total volatile organic compounds will also be being turned if they came in a gram molecular weight or whatever those compounds were, 22.4 litres for each one of them. And the same thing happens for things which are toxic, which formaldehyde, the industrial levels of formaldehyde, yet we quite often exceed those in our home. That again, some formaldehyde has been added to bread to preserve it, we will be getting that and turning that. There might have been only a few grams which were added, we get quite a large volume of formaldehyde in our air, which we can measure. And if there's bread you want to look at bread, put your monitors in a plastic bag and just close the plastic bag so the formaldehyde which comes out of the bread shows on the formaldehyde, and you'll see it is very high. Okay, so you can choose what you want to eat according to its formaldehyde content. Formaldehyde is a known carcinogen, it's going to make you sick. And then, so those are the things which are less frequent. More frequent is disinhibition. We all like having a party, we all like being merry, we all like meeting and socializing with other people. But that's exactly what the virus needs to spread. So we have to avoid that, and we have to avoid alcohol, because we will not be obeying the law if we have too much alcohol. That we all know is exactly what happens. It's disinhibiting. And then gravity is also, when we're standing upright, gravity pulls the virus down into the lower areas in the alveoli of our lung, and we've got a larger bronchial tree. And you've got dehydration, and you've got dehydration, then but we mustn't be dehydrated. For dehydration, you won't be producing the gram molecular amount of water which you should be. So we need to always make sure that we are well hydrated, particularly if we're running a dehumidifier. And the volume expired or retained is going to be dependent upon the amount of water which we are excreting, and the virus will depend upon that as well. And then it is decreased by sterilizing the airspace in our home environment. We're able to do that. Home ownership, people who own their own homes tend to have a bit more money. They have more money to spend on various things, making sure of the health of everybody who lives in their home. Home ownership is important, but it's also the places where people are renting, or the state must also provide that for people who are renting from them, so that they also have fresh air or sterilized air to breathe and to sterilize exhaled air. And wafting air away from the face, you can do this fairly easily. I like a dehumidifier to do that, but you can have a little fan there. I think the closer you are to your dehumidifier, the less chance you are to pick up COVID-19. And you get dehumidifiers which run very quietly. You can easily sleep. Mine's a noisy old one, but I'll still go to sleep. Okay. Mouthwash is also present, which can. Mouthwashes all have things in them which sterilize the mouth. Often it's fluoride. Fluoride has decreased a lot of dental caries, and there are other viricides which get added to them. So any mouthwash will have those, so it's decreasing in those areas, the mouth, the nose, and the pharynx and the tongue. All those areas which have ACE2 inhibitor sites but are not presenting with severe attachment to these sites. Also, there's a mouthwash on the market which is biphasic, which is like a soap. It produces an oily, well, it is an oily liquid, one of the components, which is very thin, like Q20 or W6 or DW40. It's a very thin oil. You use that on locks as it penetrates in deep into the lock, and it picks up the rust off, lifts the rust off, and that is what you've got here in this mouthwash. So it's lifting it off your teeth. It'll probably lift it off sites which are there as well. And that is quite an important area which we need to have a look at. Now, we can look at this all together in a diagram here, where you can see, starting at the top where you've got the airway, which is infecting and reinfection, and from the airway, which is there's the nose and the mouth, essentially, then goes down to also the pharynx and the larynx. Now, all those four areas have ACE inhibitor sites, as we mentioned, and they can be sterilized with a virucidal mouthwash. It must be spat out. It's not licensed for consumption, and there are things in it which will not help you if you swallow it. They're toxic. So we have to look at other things as well. But it looks like we, in the actual nose, mouth, pharynx, and larynx, we're actually doing quite well with not having to do anything extra to what we're doing at the present time. When it comes to tracheae, bronchi, and bronchioles, these are not got ACE inhibitor sites on them, so they are just dead space, but they contribute to the dead space. And as we mentioned, the gram molecular volume is what is important here, as it can help in getting because it's being expired, whether we're inspiring or expiring, gram molecular volume is on its way out. It's helping the virus to go out. In the bat, it's helping because it's also got gravity helping it, where it's having to go against gravity, but also the gram molecular volume, because it is both inspiration and expiration going against that parasite. The parasite, which is the virus, is going to be decreased because it is not able to control its own flow. But if you're breathing in it deeply enough, you will get it in, and you still get it down to the alveoli. And then we come to the alveoli. In the alveoli, we've got the type 2 pneumocyte, and this type 2 pneumocyte does have the ACE inhibitor sites on it. That's where the virus will attach, and also where the coconut cream could have a possible effect there as well. And then there's viral replication. Our viruses don't just arrive in the cell and then use the DNA or the RNA, there's an RNA virus in the cell, to produce multiple copies of itself. It's not as simple as that. they've got to have the building blocks, and that are not naturally there. So they've got to produce the enzymes which will break down some of the products in the cell and use purine salvage pathways and use other pathways, including the single carbon cycle, where it can synthesize these things. So there's quite a lot of endogenous synthesis going on in viral replication, and that takes time. So you have at least 2 to 3 days before you even become where the asymptomatic phase can start, where you're getting viruses being replicated, and that can last for 10 or 11 days. So if you look at the number of times that you breathe in, it's 15 breaths per minute, that is 900 per hour times by 24, that's 21,600. That's a lot of breaths in a day. And now every one of those is a chance for the virus to come in, so it's a chance for reinfection. And that is probably the main cause why this virus is so deadly, is the fact that we have all these breaths and we are rebreathing it, and it's coming in, and we don't think we're infected, but we're rebreathing it. Even if we've got a mask on and we are doing our best for a patient, if we act in asymptomatic phase, we might feel well, but we might be reinfecting ourselves. The danger of that, instead of just getting an infective dose, you can get multiple doses. You can get a lethal dose. A lethal dose is going to depend upon how quickly you get a dose which the body is unable to cope with. Okay, after that we're getting the replication and humidifying and sterilizing it, which can kill it up here. So you've got all those are phases in red where we can affect a change, whereas the bats can't. So all here we've got down the trachea and bronchi, expiration and inspiration. This is mainly the gram molecular weight, which I've already explained, and the size and the amount of it, which can be, so if you've got a gram molecular weight of water, you've got 22.4 litres. So if you're drinking 3 litres of water a day, which you've got to, that becomes a huge volume which you can produce. And then if you divide that by the number of breaths, you can get down to a figure which is about 200 moles of the 500 moles we inspire can come from water or the other constituents. Because not only water, you've got other things there which you are excreting as well, which can come out and be part of helping the body to get rid of the virus from the dead space. And once the virus is attached to the type 2 pneumocyte, that is when it is now going to start to replicate, and that's when replication first starts. And replication, once it starts and that cell dies, it's going to release 100 to several hundred new copies of the virus. And those, because the type 2 pneumocyte also is one that produces surfactant, there's decreased surfactant, the cell contracts, out goes all the contents of the cell, and that gets wafted up. When you've got sufficient cells to cause an irritant, then you're getting a cough as a consequence of that. Once you're getting a cough, then you're spreading it out and you're infecting other people with that. So that is very important, and why this is such a lethal pandemic is because bats, which are a reservoir, are ideally adapted for it. They don't even get sick. They just feel that they're okay. Whereas we get definitely very sick depending upon our age. So on entering the type 2 pneumocytes, you've had this replication which is going on, which I've already described. And then after that, we go on to the cell death, and that's also described, where you've got your now 21,000 breaths in a 10-day period. 216,000 breaths in a 10-day period, or opportunities for reinfection. And that is what we can prevent at home, because most of that is taken at home. We only send people up to hospital once they're starting to have a problem which needs to be treated in hospital. In home, we are thinking we don't need to do anything, but we very definitely do need to do quite a lot in our home. Vaccines have been outstanding preventive medicine, but have not been effective in eradicating new pandemics, such as HIV. HIV, we're still getting a pandemic around the world. 10,000 new cases a year in the UK, right? Sure, we were able to treat people so they live with it. So now start talking about people living with HIV, but we haven't eradicated it. It's still carrying on. And we've got to be careful because the more viruses we get that we cannot eradicate through vaccines because they are replicating too quickly. And the problem with this is even while we're waiting to produce our first vaccine against it, it has mutated. So we've now got two COVID-19s and we're having to start from scratch. And how long it's going to take us again? And if they can mutate very quickly, we may not be able to keep cope with producing vaccines each time. So we've got to look at the other methods which are around. And one of those other methods is to wash and clean our polluted atmosphere. We've been doing it for too long. We've polluted our atmosphere. Now we are having our economies, our health, our elderly dying. All of this is happening because we haven't done what everybody has been telling us we should have done years and years ago, including me. I presented to the World Police Medical Officers Conference in 2003. That's 17 years ago. And I warned of this pandemic then. But nobody seemed to have taken any notice. I'm sure they have taken a notice, and I'm sure they knew about that. It wasn't old knowledge at the time. But until we're forced to do things, we don't do things. We're now being forced to do something. So we have to do something about it. Now, once you've got past the asymptomatic phase, and there are three asymptomatic phases, the one where the person never becomes symptomatic, and that quite a lot of children probably get that, and they become sometimes immune to it, but they don't know that they've had it even. And there are those pre-symptomatic before they become symptomatic, and then you know because they become symptomatic that they have had it, so there was a phase which they went through. And then there are those post-symptomatic after they have now started to produce antibodies and everything to it. They can still be symptomatic, they can still be spreading it, so we need to watch out for that as well. So in the symptomatic phase, we can sterilize. If you've got somebody in the home, you probably need to more than just dehydrate the air, you need to sterilize the air because it's probably got virus in it. You can do that with a UV light, you can do that by taking the water, put it in a pressure cooker and killing it, because that's the way we sterilize things with moist heat in hospitals, or you can just pour it on the garden. There are plenty of bacteria and things, or kill the virus in the soil. So the symptomatic phase is a phase which gets usually managed at home until we start to have a decrease in the oxygen saturation. Pulse oximeters now most homes have. And the pulse oximeter, if that's showing you've got a low oxygen, then it's time to go to hospital. They'll decide whether they're going to put you on a ventilator or not. They now realise that, like the bats have a negative pressure, and that's what we should really have. But for years, it's been now positive pressure, which we use in all our resuscitation techniques. Not everybody does that. Some people in Europe use other techniques, the Schaefer and Holger Nielsen, which is a negative pressure. And those are what we perhaps should be using more often if we are trying to resuscitate a person in the in our present environment. You don't know who they are. You certainly shouldn't be using mouth-to-mouth. There are masks which you can use, and most people are trying to avoid having to get involved with that at all, do it mechanically. Okay, so respiratory distress is what we send people into hospital for, intensive care management. This we must prevent. We can prevent it at home, so we must be doing it. We've not been doing it, but we can do it. Sorry, I've got an ideal system here. There's another one there. There's all recovery. Mainly this is dictated by how well or how badly we've managed them in the home. If we treat them here, then they shouldn't be going up to hospital. But if we don't treat them here, they will get worse and they will be going up to the hospital. And so long COVID or death is probably more our fault than it is those who blame themselves quite often in A&E or in intensive care. They're doing their best, and their best they have to do what is necessary. And so people who get long COVID, if they hadn't been doing their best, would probably have died as well. So the figures could easily be much better. People who can do most, in fact, are the home. We now to switch our emphasis, say the NHS manage the people correctly at home by taking away the virus threat. Just dehumidify the air. The virus will be in the humid little particles. So all the other pollutants that are present, purify our air and give our family clean air to breathe at home. So we must all work together to achieve this. This we can prevent at home, and this we must prevent at home. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Bye.